What if America's closest military alliance collapsed over ice? Donald Trump wants Greenland. Europe is preparing to fight back. And NATO, the shield that's protected the West for 75 years, might not survive what comes next. Act 1. The threat that changed everything. The map of global power is being redrawn, and it's happening in one of the coldest, most remote places on Earth, Greenland, a massive island covered in ice, home to just 57,000 people, sitting between North America and Europe. For decades, it was a quiet territory under Danish control, a frozen frontier that rarely made headlines. But today, it's become the flashpoint in a crisis that could fundamentally reshape the Western world. Donald Trump, now back in the White House, has made his intentions unmistakably clear. He wants Greenland. And he's willing to use America's economic muscle to get it. In recent weeks, Trump hasn't just expressed interest in acquiring the autonomous Danish territory, he's turned that interest into policy. Through a series of public statements and social media posts, the president announced sweeping tariffs targeting 8 European nations. The list reads like a roll call of America's oldest allies: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Finland, and the Netherlands. The tariffs would start at 10%, but here's the ultimatum that sent shockwaves through Brussels. Unless a Greenland-related agreement is reached, those tariffs would surge to 25%. It's economic warfare dressed up as negotiation, and European leaders are calling it exactly what it is: unacceptable coercion. But Trump isn't backing down. In press conferences and interviews, he's framed Greenland as a matter of American national security. He's talked about incorporating the island into his proposed Golden Dome missile defense system, a futuristic shield meant to protect the United States from incoming threats. He's pointed to Russian and Chinese activities in the Arctic as justification for American control. And when reporters asked whether he would rule out using military force to take Greenland, Trump refused to answer directly. "I don't talk about what we will or won't do," he said, leaving the door wide open to interpretations that ranged from diplomatic pressure to something far more alarming. For European officials watching from across the Atlantic, the message was unmistakable. This wasn't just talk. This was a fundamental challenge to principles that have underpinned Western security for 3/4 of a century. Act 2. Europe's dilemma. Behind closed doors in Brussels, urgent conversations are taking place. European Union officials, defense ministers, and diplomatic teams are scrambling to figure out how to respond to a threat unlike anything they've faced from Washington before. The problem is multi-layered. On one hand, there's the immediate economic danger. The proposed tariffs would hit some of Europe's largest economies, countries that are not just trade partners with the United States, but military allies bound by NATO treaties. Major industries, from automotive manufacturing in Germany to energy exports in Norway, could face devastating losses. Analysts estimate billions in economic damage if Trump follows through. On the other hand, there's the deeper strategic question: what happens when your most important military ally starts threatening your sovereignty? Denmark has been clear from the beginning. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen and Greenlandic leaders have stated repeatedly that Greenland is not for sale. The island has autonomous governance under the Kingdom of Denmark, and both Copenhagen and Nuuk, Greenland's capital, have rejected any notion of American ownership. Danish officials have called Trump's threats and pressure tactics completely unacceptable violations of international norms. But rhetoric alone won't solve this crisis. Europe needs options, and it needs them fast. According to media reports citing sources familiar with the discussions, European officials are exploring several potential responses. These aren't official policies yet. Nothing has been formally adopted. But the conversations happening in diplomatic channels reveal just how seriously Europe is taking Trump's Greenland push. One option being discussed, however theoretical, is the possibility of restricting American access to European military bases. This might sound extreme, but it's rooted in a hard reality. The United States depends heavily on European infrastructure to project power around the world. Consider Ramstein Air Base in Germany, one of the largest American military installations outside the United States. It serves as a critical hub for operations across Africa, the Middle East, and even as far as Venezuela. British airfields support American reconnaissance and refueling missions. Naval facilities in Norway and Spain give the U.S. Navy strategic positioning in both the Atlantic and Mediterranean. If Europe decided to limit access to these bases, even partially, it would severely complicate American military operations globally. It's leverage that Europe has never seriously considered using before. But analysts say that Trump's threats over Greenland have pushed conversations into territory once considered unthinkable. Then there's the European Union's anti-coercion instrument, a legal mechanism designed to protect member states from economic bullying by foreign powers. The instrument allows the EU to impose countermeasures, potentially targeting American companies bidding for European contracts or limiting trade in strategic sectors. Crucially, it's never been used against the United States, but it exists precisely for situations like this. Still, European leaders understand the risks. Any escalation could trigger American retaliation. Changes to intelligence sharing, adjustments in military cooperation, or even shifts in Arctic policy that could leave Europe more vulnerable, not less. The continent faces a delicate balancing act. Respond too weakly, and you signal that sovereignty can be threatened without consequence. Respond too aggressively, and you risk fracturing the alliance that has guaranteed European security since 1949. Act 3. Why Greenland Matters. To understand why Trump is so fixated on Greenland, you need to understand what's happening in the Arctic. Climate change is transforming the region at a pace that's shocking even to scientists. Sea ice that once made Arctic waters impassable for most of the year is melting earlier and freezing later. New shipping routes are opening up, pathways that could cut weeks off trade journeys between Asia and Europe. And beneath the ice, vast reserves of rare earth minerals, oil, and natural gas are becoming accessible for the first time in human history. The Arctic isn't just thawing, it's becoming one of the most strategically valuable regions on the planet. Russia has militarized its Arctic frontier aggressively, building new bases, deploying advanced weapon systems, and conducting regular military exercises. China, despite being thousands of miles away, has declared itself a near-Arctic nation and invested heavily in Arctic research and resource extraction. For Beijing, controlling Arctic shipping routes could reshape global trade dynamics entirely. The United States, historically focused on other theaters, is now waking up to the reality that it's falling behind in the Arctic competition. And Greenland sits right in the middle of it all. From a purely geographic standpoint, Greenland is unmatched. It offers surveillance capabilities over Arctic shipping lanes, potential sites for missile defense installations, and proximity to both Russian and Canadian Arctic territories. For military planners thinking about great power competition in the 21st century, Greenland is a strategic prize that's hard to overstate. Trump has explicitly connected Greenland to his proposed Golden Dome missile defense system, a network of sensors, interceptors, and command centers designed to protect the United States from missile attacks. Defense experts who've analyzed the concept say that Greenland would provide critical early warning capabilities, giving the U.S. precious minutes of additional response time in a crisis. Trump has also repeatedly questioned whether Denmark can adequately defend Greenland from Russian or Chinese influence. In public comments, he's used humor, sometimes cutting humor, to suggest that Denmark's military is too small and under-resourced to handle Arctic security challenges. The implication is clear. If Denmark won't sell Greenland, maybe it should at least accept a much larger American military presence there. Danish officials have bristled at these suggestions. They point out that Denmark already cooperates closely with NATO on Arctic defense, and that Greenland hosts American military facilities, including Thule Air Base, a critical early warning station for ballistic missile detection. From Copenhagen's perspective, the current arrangement works. What Trump is proposing isn't enhanced cooperation. It's a fundamental change in sovereignty. Act 4. Inside the diplomatic battle. The diplomatic maneuvering around Greenland has been intense, complex, and at times almost surreal. Trump's team has engaged in what sources describe as a multi-pronged strategy. There have been formal diplomatic meetings. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance reportedly held talks with Danish officials, though both sides say fundamental differences remain. There have also been public pressure campaigns, with Trump using his massive social media following to keep Greenland in the headlines. And, there have been attempts to influence Greenlandic public opinion directly. Congressional delegations have proposed initiatives focused on Greenland's political status, exploring whether the island might be interested in closer ties with the United States independent of Denmark. Some proposals have included economic incentives, investment packages, infrastructure development, resource extraction agreements, designed to make American involvement more attractive to Greenlanders themselves. But honestly, these efforts face serious obstacles. Public polling in the United States shows that fewer than 20% of Americans actually support acquiring Greenland, suggesting that Trump's push doesn't have broad domestic backing. And within Greenland, skepticism about American intentions runs deep. Greenlanders remember their history, including the forced relocation of indigenous communities when the U.S. built Thule Air Base in the 1950s. A bipartisan group of American lawmakers reportedly visited Copenhagen to express solidarity with Denmark, highlighting divisions even within Trump's own political coalition. For some Republicans and Democrats alike, threatening a NATO ally crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed, regardless of strategic justifications. European responses have been equally complex. At Denmark's request, small military contingents from several European NATO countries, including about 15 French specialists, have participated in Arctic endurance exercises in Greenland. These deployments are highly symbolic. They're not meant to establish a major military presence. They're meant to send a political message. Europe stands with Denmark. France, in particular, has taken a strong position. President Emmanuel Macron has publicly stressed the importance of respecting Greenland's sovereignty, and French lawmakers have suggested increasing European Union involvement in Greenland to demonstrate continental commitment. For Paris, the Greenland crisis fits into a larger vision that Macron has championed for years: European strategic autonomy, the idea that Europe should be capable of defending its own interests without total dependence on the United States. Act 5. The unthinkable becomes thinkable. Perhaps the most striking development in this crisis isn't what's happening in Greenland. It's what's happening in European capitals, particularly Paris. For decades, leaving NATO was considered political suicide in mainstream European politics. The alliance was foundational, untouchable, the bedrock of Western security. Only fringe voices on the far left and far right ever seriously suggested withdrawal. But Trump's Greenland push has changed the conversation. In France, analysts report that discussions about leaving NATO, or at least fundamentally rethinking French participation, are becoming more open, more mainstream, more urgent. These aren't official government positions, but they're no longer confined to the political margins either. Clémence Guettet, Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, represents this shift. She's criticized NATO as overly dominated by American interests, arguing that the alliance potentially undermines France's sovereignty and strategic freedom. Her political party, France Insoumise, has historically advocated for NATO reform or even dissolution. What's new isn't her position, it's that her position is getting a wider hearing. Guettet warns that remaining in NATO could entangle France in conflicts that contradict French national interests. It's a fundamental question. If your alliance partner is threatening another ally's territory, what does the alliance actually mean? President Macron hasn't endorsed leaving NATO, but he's also made clear his frustration with what he sees as American unilateralism. The Greenland crisis, from the French perspective, is evidence that Europe can't simply assume American priorities will align with European security needs. If Washington is willing to threaten Denmark, a founding NATO member, over territorial ambitions, what other assumptions need to be reconsidered? Think tanks across Europe are now openly discussing scenarios that would have seemed absurd just months ago. What would European defense look like without American support? Could the European Union develop its own nuclear deterrent? How much would it cost to replace American military capabilities currently provided through NATO? These aren't easy questions, and the answers are deeply uncomfortable. European defense budgets are already stretched. Many member states struggle to meet NATO's target of spending 2% of GDP on defense. Building truly autonomous European military capabilities would require massive investment at a time when economies are fragile and populations are aging. But the alternative, continuing to depend entirely on an American ally whose president threatens fellow alliance members, seems increasingly untenable. Act 6. The Alliance at a Crossroads. NATO has survived the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and countless political disputes among member states. It's proven remarkably resilient across 75 years of history. But the Greenland crisis exposes fault lines that might prove harder to repair. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty states that an attack on one member is an attack on all. It's the core commitment that makes the alliance meaningful, the promise that if any member faces aggression, the others will come to its defense. But what happens when the threat comes from inside the alliance itself? If Trump were to pursue Greenland through military means, a scenario he's explicitly refused to rule out, it would place European NATO members in an impossible position. Defend Denmark, and you're in direct conflict with the United States. Stand aside, and Article 5 becomes meaningless. Even short of military action, the current situation is corrosive. Trust between allies depends on shared values and mutual respect. When one ally threatens another with economic punishment over territorial demands, that trust erodes rapidly. Danish officials have warned that aggressive American actions toward Greenland would have serious repercussions for cooperation across multiple domains, not just military, but intelligence sharing, diplomatic coordination, Arctic research, and trade relationships that extend far beyond tariff disputes. Security analysts point out that NATO isn't just a military alliance. It's an ecosystem of shared logistics, compatible weapons systems, joint training programs, and integrated command structures. Decades of cooperation have made American and European forces deeply interdependent. Unraveling that cooperation wouldn't just be politically difficult. It would be operationally complex and strategically dangerous at a time when global threats are multiplying. Russia is watching this crisis with obvious interest. Any fracture in NATO serves Moscow's strategic goals. If the alliance splinters over Greenland, it removes the primary obstacle to Russian influence in Eastern Europe and the Arctic. China, too, benefits from transatlantic division, particularly if it reduces coordinated Western responses to Chinese expansion in the Indo-Pacific. This is the bitter irony of Trump's Greenland strategy. In the name of American security, it may be creating the conditions for American strategic isolation. Conclusion: the choice ahead. As winter deepens across the Arctic, the ice continues its relentless retreat. Greenland, that vast frozen island, sits at the center of converging forces: climate change, great power competition, resource extraction, military strategy, and now, an alliance crisis that could reshape the entire Western order. Donald Trump sees Greenland as a strategic necessity, essential for American security in a dangerous world. Denmark sees it as sovereign territory, not a bargaining chip in geopolitical games. Europe sees it as a test of whether international law and alliance commitments still mean anything in the 21st century. The coming months will reveal whether these positions can be reconciled, or whether the Greenland dispute becomes the wedge that finally splits the West. What's certain is that the decisions made now will echo for decades. If Trump succeeds in acquiring Greenland through purchase, coercion, or expanded military presence, it will establish a precedent that sovereignty can be overcome through economic and military pressure, even among allies. If Europe responds forcefully enough to deter American actions, it may accelerate the shift toward European strategic autonomy and fundamentally alter NATO's character. The Arctic is warming, the ice is melting, and beneath the surface of this frozen dispute lies a question that goes far beyond one island. In an age of rising powers and declining rules, what holds alliances together when the threats come from within? Greenland didn't ask to be at the center of history, but history has a way of finding the places where tectonic plates collide. And right now, on that ice-covered island between two continents, the plates of the Western Alliance are grinding against each other with a force that could either forge something new or shatter everything that came before. The world is watching, and honestly, what happens next in Greenland won't stay in Greenland.